Right. My name is Christopher Black. I'm a criminal lawyer based in Toronto, Canada. But for the last 15 years, I've been involved in International War Crimes Tribunal work at the Yugoslav Tribunal in The Hague, but most of my time at the Rwanda Tribunal in Tanzania. And there was defending the Chief of Staff of the National Police, the Gendarmerie, General Augustin Dindilia-Mana, who was acquitted just this February of all the charges after 15 years of imprisonment. My position here at this forum is to put across the point of view that these tribunals are not institutions of criminal justice as is portrayed in the mass media or by the tribunals themselves, but in fact are politically motivated courts whose purpose is one thing: propaganda. That the trials, the people targeted for the charges are carefully selected to represent certain segments of the regimes which have been overthrown in Yugoslavia and Rwanda, for instance. And they target certain leaders, political leaders, military personnel, intellectuals, and so on. And in my experience, from all the trials I've been involved with and have knowledge of, all the charges are politically based, motivated. And the purpose of the propaganda aspect of it is that they're used, first of all, to demonize the old regime so it can't come back to power, to put out a false picture of what actually happened in those wars, and to cover up the real role of the West in those wars. That's the purpose of these tribunals, and that's the only purpose they serve, in my view. So they are a form of, they are tools, in fact weapons of war as far as I'm concerned, used to help overthrow these regimes and justify the maintenance of the new regime. So the international law is being used as a tool, a device to justify and maintain regime change, if you want to use that phrase. And the International Criminal Court, which we had high hopes for, is turning out to be exactly the same thing as these ad hoc tribunals. Because all the charges so far have been against Congolese and people from Central and West Africa, and they target only certain African leaders. Some people accuse the ICC of being racist because they're only targeting blacks. I don't accept that. It's true they only target black Africans, but they only target certain black Africans. They don't target, for instance, Paul Kagame or Museveni, who have committed mass murders in the Congo. Maybe 6 to 10 million people have been killed by their forces in the last 15 years, and they're not charged. So African leaders who oppose Western interests are targeted. Those who support or are puppets of Western interests are left alone to do what they want. And that's my position. And I came here to speak. My unique contribution was to try and get people to understand what actually goes on in these trials, because most people don't pay attention to the trials themselves. So I wanted to tell people what I saw go on in these trials and how the prosecution and how the Western intelligence services arrange these trials and fix these trials up and trying to basically frame these people. That's what my purpose was. Do I support humanitarian intervention, so-called? My perspective on that is that in almost every case where humanitarian intervention has been called for, it's been based on propaganda, which has turned out to be false. And the propaganda is used to justify aggressive war against countries disguised as humanitarian intervention. The idea that humankind should go and protect everybody everywhere is fine if it was applied equally across the board, but it's not, and it can't be. There's no way, for instance, if in Canada the Canadian regime suppressed the native population, which they're doing, and that they would tolerate Russia or China coming in and invading Canada to change the regime in Ottawa. They wouldn't be tolerated. They would be called aggression, which is what it would be. So the Western imperial powers like the United States and Britain and Canada and so on have the gall to say that they have the right to go in and act like policemen around the world and invade countries and overthrow their regimes, supposedly to protect the population, based on propaganda, is nothing more than a prescription for world chaos and world war. Now, if you had an actual situation where a population was being massacred by its own population, by its own government, then the only people, the only organization which could call for some action is the UN Security Council. If the UN Security Council, under Chapter 7, authorized an action and called for that government to stop, that would be the first step. And if you don't stop, then we're going to do something for you. I could agree with that because that's what all the nations of the world have agreed to who are members of the UN Charter, which is everyone. But that's not what's happening. So if the Russians or Chinese veto, or the Americans veto an action against Israel or something, or against themselves, the Americans claim, well, then we act on our own. Well, that's not what the UN Charter says you can do. If you can't convince the members of the Security Council you have a case, you have no case, and you can't act. Otherwise, there's no international law whatsoever. You have basically vigilante bodies roaming around the world doing vigilante actions. And that is not the way you can have international law and peace and order in this world. It's just a prescription for war. To sum up, my position is that you cannot have peace and order in this world unless every country obeys the law. And that, right now, is the UN Charter, United Nations Charter. Unilateral action by any country or a group of countries is nothing more than a prescription for world chaos and perhaps world war. It doesn't help the situation. It never has in any of these instances. And it's got to be stopped. Humanitarian intervention is a false proposition. It is not valid. It doesn't work. And in general terms, it's just used to justify aggression for other reasons.